Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, John Beatty, Principal Consultant, 1111 Systems. We're super excited to have John with us for his thought leadership presentation titled Cybercrime and Compromised Data. Managing risk is everyone's business. Welcome, John. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Our focus today is going to be on several key factors. First of all, some data is worthy of spending money on, and some data isn't, relative to recoverability. Organizations really should not rely solely on IT to recover maliciously compromised data. The business community must be involved and ready to do their part in the recovery effort. And lastly, improving compromised data recoverability improves cyber insurability. That's going to be a key factor you'll hear me mention throughout this discussion. So again, there's a few key things that I definitely want you to remember, and you can see a few of those on the screen here, as I just mentioned. And by the way, there'll be a few slides that I'm going to kind of go through fairly quickly. You will all have access to a PDF version of this presentation, so you can kind of dig into some of the more wordy slides, and I'm just going to cover them at a fairly high level. So first thing I want to talk about is there is, of course, the ever-present threat of ransomware, and an article was just published this morning, as a matter of fact, by Wall Street Journal Pro, indicating that even though ransomware attacks were the lowest they've been in a few years last year, they are expecting 2023, and all indications are it will be at least double the number of attacks that actually did take place last year. So it's may have had a little bit of lull in the action, so to speak, but it's according to the Wall Street Journal, back and thriving, and is expected to resume with a vengeance, if you will. So today it's really about our organization's ability to recover data following a cyber attack, because what you really don't want to happen is not being able to recover data and to get your business back up and operational. So the age-old dilemma that we you always hear is and Willie Sutton said it, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where the money is. Well, why are there ransomware attacks? Well, the simple answer is that's you are where the money is. And many organizations, a high percentage of organizations, and there's so many studies on this, it's kind of crazy, but a lot of organizations simply pay the ransom because that is their best business, alternative. And again, your organization is where the money is. And this is just a reference to the Wall Street Journal Pro article that I mentioned earlier. So why do organizations pay? Well, if there's a game over in the UK called Outsmarted. Well, the cyber criminals outsmarted you. They got to your production data and they got to your backups. And if you've been outsmarted, you may find that it's better, faster, cheaper to pay the ransom, go through the decryption process, than to actually do the recovery yourself. So depending on where you are, relative to your confidence, relative to your backups and your use of modern data protection, and we'll talk more about that as we get going here. It is important to make sure that you are prepared in case you do have to pay the ransom and undertake the decryption process. And there's always that inevitable issue where data has been exfiltrated. But that's not really, and there's the threat of broadcasting it out to the world, so to speak. But we're not really focused on that today. We're focused really on making sure that you are ready to recover by a variety of means. So, now we all probably recognize that, that there are, well-intended, if you will, threat actors that are out there. But there's certainly no guarantee that cyber criminals are going to come through for you. Many of them do. Many of them are quite, have fantastic customer service. Many don't. So there's never a guarantee that you'll be able to recover your data based on what you have put in place and how sophisticated the cyber attackers were. And there's no guarantee that you will be able to recover it through decryption following, payment of the, of the ransom. According to a Sophos white paper last year, 65% of encrypted data was able to be, restored after the ransom. There's a lot of reasons for it. Bad decryption keys, damage to the actual data, as the encryption process was happening. Again, the different threat actors all have different ratings, if you will, for their, ability to be of assistance to you and value to you after you've actually paid the, paid the ransom. So again, kind of building the case for why you need to be prepared for data recovery across a variety of, scenarios. There is a question that did pop up. It's that, my thoughts on paying, the ransom. It's really going to, as you'll see in a couple more slides, it's a business decision. Is it faster, better, cheaper to pay the ransom and go through the decryption process than to be able to recover the data yourself? In many cases, it is faster to pay the ransom and get your business back up and operational. So, it's always going to be situationally dependent. And what we find is that many organizations, reserve the right to make that decision, at time of the situation based on the circumstances of the attack. So sometimes it is the best option, and sometimes you can get back operational quickly enough by other means that there's no need to it. But it's the option really should always be on the table. And of course, if it's an organization that's on the OFAC list, where you can't pay it, well, then obviously, then that's a whole nother issue. But if it's not a nefarious organization that is on the U.S. Treasury's list of do not pay organizations, then you're gonna have, your executives are gonna have to make that hard decision. And we'll come back a little bit more on that question, later on. So, if I think about, I want to take a moment and talk about traditional disaster recovery, and what that's about. And you can see here we have a die, if you will, that has all sixes. So you have a pretty good chance if you do your testing, you go through all the efforts that you have to go through in order to validate that you can fail over from one data center to another one, whether it's your cloud on-prem or whatever. It doesn't really matter. If you go, do your testing, have your plans, keep parity, if you will, between production and your targeted backup area, you have a pretty good chance of actually being able, to meet the recovery time objective. And typically there's a, you'll be, the gap, you've got various recovery points. You should probably be able to, achieve that target. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. Most likely, many organizations will have, plan B, what am I going to do while those systems are down and while I'm going through the disaster recovery process to fail over from data center A to data center B. And then you may have a plan for filling the gap. So what does that mean? Because this is going to kind of become important. So if you have recovery point objectives other than 0, 4 hours, 8 hours, 24, 48, whatever the number is, doesn't matter. That is the business giving IT permission to not recover data. Well, that's interesting, right? So it's then incumbent on the business to either, to fill the gap or decide to continue to operate without filling the gap, and that's really up to them. But the RPO is the business community giving IT permission to not do something, to not recover a certain amount of data. So what we see in many business continuity plans over the past several years, and we always include those in ours, is including in the BC plans, well, how are you going to fill that gap? And again, 4, 8, 24, whatever the time frame is, making sure that the business knows how they're going to cover the gap. And that's important as we kind of move on to this next track, if you will. Is that not moving? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Compromised data recovery is a different scenario. Okay. And you can see the die on that left-hand side is, has all 6 numbers, if you will, on it. So you're not really sure if you're going to be able to make the recovery time objective that's established for a totally different recovery scenario, your traditional DR scenario. So, so first of all, recovery time, generally speaking, is out the window. It just ain't going to happen. And rarely does, because recovery in following a data compromising cyber attack might take quite some time, because your infosec people have to get in there and do their thing. You might bring in, have DFIR firm come in. You may have a breach coach come in. You got a whole bunch of new players that are involved in the recovery effort. Your cyber insurance carrier, all those. There's a whole bunch of folks that are involved, in this thing. And recovery time is, the majority of the time, probably 90% of the time, is just simply out the window. You're not going to be able to, recover after a successful cyber intrusion. The recovery point, you can see that gap there in that chasm has gotten quite big. So you might conceivably be losing much more data than the RPO point that may have been set for traditional disaster recovery. So that gap could be a day, 2 days, a week. We often see that that taking place, and therefore you need to have plans called Plan C and Plan C plus on that right-hand side to say, well, I may need to know how the business is going to do whatever it does for a time period, in excess of the RTO value, which is defined for typically a very different, recovery scenario. And then obviously, how am I going to cover the data loss gap, as well. So that's that's something that you really need to be, considering as you, begin to think about how you want to have your organization be ready for what could arguably be the inevitable, cyber intrusion, meaning successful cyber attack. And by the way, I started picking up on that term cyber intrusion because that's a term that the FBI uses to mean a successful cyber attack. It has actually been impactful to your organization. There's a few more questions, but I'm going to cover some of these, cover a lot of these, at the end. So, when time is of the essence, you really need to know how your, predefined plans, pre-validation of your plans. How am I going to recover, certain data? And just like you do disaster recovery planning and testing and, validations and what have you, tabletop exercises, a whole host of things to make sure that you're pretty comfortable you can pull it off. Well, you need to do the same thing around the cyber recovery scenario as well, making sure that you can actually, undertake a successful, recovery effort. Whether you have any of the, the more modern, solutions, making sure that you can, people know when there's an anomaly taking place with your backups, that you can follow appropriate process and all those kinds of things. And we'll get more into that topic in a moment as well. And just to make sure, and again, not going to read all this stuff, but just to point out that Gartner has a lot to say on this topic as well. A lot of what I've been chatting with you about or discussing with you is really, reinforced by some of these comments from Gartner. And again, we'll make these slides available to you, so you don't have to read this stuff and remember it. But I think what is important, and because I'm going to be reinforcing it, it says in that under identify, you need to be able to recover the data that is most critical to your organization. Okay, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that in a slide or two, but just wanted to point that out. You need to be able to make sure that you're obviously protecting data and you have plans and capabilities to be able to recover. And those are some of the highlights of this particular slide and quotes from from Gartner. I want to dig into this particular topic, and without reading all the boxes, and on the next slide I will talk about some of these boxes. But we often get called in to do assessments of organizations. Is the organization really ready to recover data that has been compromised by a malicious cyber attack, and either from internal or external threat actors? And when we go in and we do that, we have about 100 and a little over 100 different control points, if you will, and identifying if those are all there, you're probably in pretty good shape. And then we identify against these top 20 high level control areas, and again there's a lot of depth underneath it. Kind of provide feedback to where an organization might be relative to be able to recover compromised data, not disaster recovery, compromised data, and then to identify remediation plans, and then upon successful accomplishment of those remediation plans, turn reds and oranges and yellows to to greens, if you will. So I'm going to chat a little bit more about that, but it's always important to understand where you are, so that when you're asked by your executives, board of directors, whoever, where you are in the journey, you've got something defensible, to be able to put on the table, and to also to help you identify where you can, pick up, some extra funding, if you will, in order to, reduce your overall risk, and recoverability. Here is the same. Here's those same slides, but in a little bit more detail. And the leftmost box is about identifying, and our terminology is vital data assets. So what is the data? And we'll talk more about that on the next slide. This is not the critical data. This is the data that actually, is essential to driving the mission of the organization. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Then for that data, and that's the data that also requires, an investment in advanced levels of protection, modern data protection, to use another Gartner term. And that's, your immutability and encryption, and making sure you've got, the proper controls and air gapping, and very, very important anomaly detection, and making sure that all, your data backup capabilities, check all the boxes, if you will. And you've got to be able to make sure in those, respond and recover, that you have plans to be able to do the recovery. The IT knows about the different options. We're going to talk more about that in a second. The different options that they have to recover data, and it's not just restoration. That's a little sneak peek of what's going to come in a moment. And then also having, in that right-hand column, the ability to, make sure that you're truly, you've done all the testing and exercising and all the things you need to do. You've got a place to, do forensic analysis and all those kinds of things. Again, not going to go into too many of those details here, because there's a lot, underneath this. But the important thing is, as I was mentioning, is vital data assets. An organization is mission enabling and must have data, that is needed to support the minimally viable enterprise, meaning I can continue to serve my customers, I can generate revenue, and I can remain in control. And we often find that as you'll see on the slide in a moment, that vital data assets are a subset of what have been typically identified as critical data for traditional disaster recovery. So it's typically a subset. And sorry, just hit the button by mistake there. So it's very important to make sure that you understand what all that, data that really is the most vital to the organization and is vital to getting you back up and operational, generating revenue. And it's going to be unique to every organization. Data backup and restoration, yes, it's very important. As you probably heard up until now through this conversation, it is not sufficient. So what is necessary in order to be sure that the business, and that's everybody's business to be able to recover data, well, that's in place. So IT-led data recovery takes two tracks: restoration from backups, go figure, but also be ready to actually decrypt compromised data using an acquired decryption key, whether you paid the ransom or whether you're able to get a decryption key from other sources without paying the threat actor. IT needs to be prepared for that just in case. How are they going to do it? Where are they going to do it? How are they going to make sure that the decryption key acquired from the threat actor, doesn't introduce yet some more problems into the organization? So IT organizations, for their vital data, should be ready to both restore from backups and decrypt using a decryption key. And it's important to validate all that, have plans for all that, know where you're going to do all that, know what role does your DFIR firm play in all that. So there's a lot of things to be thinking about, relative to that. Then there's business-led data recovery. The business has to fill that gap. Remember I showed you earlier, that chasm, in that one diagram. Well, the business needs to be able to, for certain data, I can probably just re-enter it. Maybe I can go to emails, maybe I have some kind of documents. So it's possible in some areas to re-enter data from original source materials, and the business should be prepared for that. They might be able to recreate data from a variety of sources, from internal sources. Probably the best example is I can recreate my warehouse inventory data by going out and saying, okay, I've got 5 widgets here and other items there, and I can actually recreate that data by manual means by re-inventorying a warehouse and updating and filling the gap that way. Then we find that there's other mechanisms as well, a little bit more collaborative between IT and business. Reprocess transactions from on-network sources, or I can maybe re-download things that came in through EDI. Might be able to rebuild data from various other systems where I can actually go back and recreate upstream data, if you will, that may have been lost. So it's important to think about a variety of different options that are out there. Again, it's compromised data recovery is not an IT only issue. And that's very, very important to remember. Put some of that onus back on the business community to make sure that they're ready to step up and do their part. I know we only have a couple more minutes. I want to talk about cyber insurability a bit. Obviously board, executives, senior leadership, board of directors, private equity firms that, may be owning organizations, they want to make sure you can prevent cyber intrusions, but they also need to make sure that the organization can minimize interruption, should an intrusion actually happen. They're also very focused on finding the right balance between mitigated and transferred risk. I'm going to talk more about that on the next slide. And they're also concerned about obtaining cost-effective cyber insurance. So it really is about finding the right balance, between all of these things, making sure that the board of directors, your executive leadership understands, where you are on the risk continuum, if you will, relative to being able to, recover after, should a cyber attack be successful. So, with that, there's a couple minutes, left for some questions. one question came in, aren't clean rooms basically limited to the largest, of companies? No, that's not the case, because you can establish a clean room, if you're using, if you're in the, operating in the cloud, if you've got a relationship with, any cloud provider, you can set up a clean room, at one of their facilities. You might want to have, your own on-prem, clean room, but there's no reason that you can't, at time of need, stand up a, an environment that is off network, and to do your, to do your decryption. Let's see, largest the companies. How do you persuade? Here's another question. How do you persuade leadership to respect IT security processes, given that many data breaches are caused by higher level, carelessness, such as using, well, regardless of how it happens, and it doesn't take much, as we saw from the, the MGM situation. Somebody got duped, and they lost what, $150 million. And another, they didn't pay the ransom, if I recall correctly. And then another casino a few weeks ago actually did pay the ransom. Haven't heard yet, if one fared better than the other for making the payments or not. But it really is about making sure that, obviously, you want to do your fair share to prevent it. But what you can't do, you can't assume is, if I've got a good prevention team and a good, good education for all my, for all my workforce, you can't assume it's not going to happen. And therefore, for that vital data, the data that really does matter, and the data that's going to make a difference with your cyber insurance carrier, and I'm going to talk about that in a second if I have time. It's important to make sure you know how you're going to be able to recover. And when it comes to the cyber insurability issue, we work with, insurance carriers and brokers, and, they are digging in deeper day by day, if you will, to make sure that they understand, is the organization truly prepared from a business perspective as well as an IT perspective to recover data, and that's making a difference in the policy. And a good example is, there's a hospital that we work with, and I've got many stories, but I'll just use one as an example. And the cyber insurance carrier said, we'll write you your policy, but if you put in a modern data protection solution, the day you have that project completed, we will double your coverage for the same premium. And there's a variety of other stories where clients of ours have been denied cyber insurance until they put in certain capabilities, in place within their organization. And I'm just going to go back to this particular slide. Sorry for all the clicks. Look, cyber insurance carriers are looking at the controls you may have in place, and they're stepping it up month over month over month, and making sure that you have a plan to remediate your issues. And when you do, you'll be granted, you might be granted cyber insurance at that point, or you may be, be provided with, a lesser premium, or more coverage as you go from that upper left to that lower right image. So I know we're about out of time here, it's important. One last thought is, it's important for IT to work closely with your risk team, who are involved with your cyber insurance carriers, to make sure that you're making investments in the right controls that will both help you recover as well as help you get the best possible cyber insurance coverage. So that's really all I have. And I apologize for talking kind of quickly, but I really wanted to make sure I got a lot of great points across, and I hope you all have found value in the conversation.
Yes. Thank you again, John, for such an awesome thought leadership presentation. Goes fast, right? I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.